Aphany stood in the hallway, holding a tray of tea, when she heard her mother-in-law's voice softly but clearly through the doorway. "She's just a guest until she gives us a grandchild," Remla said to her son, Omeric. The words pierced Aphany's heart like a knife. She froze. Her hands shook, but she didn't make a sound. She quietly turned away, holding her tears. This wasn't the first time she had felt unwanted in the house. Aphany had been trying to have a baby for years. She had visited doctors, tried treatments, prayed every night, and stayed quiet during all the cruel remarks. But the silence in her womb wasn't the only thing breaking her. It was the silence in her marriage, the cold shoulders, and the eyes that stopped seeing her as a wife, only as a failure. Remla always acted sweet in front of guests, but behind closed doors, she made sure Aphany felt less of a wife, less of a woman. Omeric, too, started changing. He became distant, lost in his mother's shadow, never truly defending Aphany. Still, she stayed, hoping, trying. But then came the family dinner. Everyone was gathered. Laughter filled the room. And then, Remla raised a glass and said loudly, "To the future of our family, may our bloodline continue with strong sons and proud names." Her eyes rested on Aphany for just a moment too long. The message was clear. Everyone heard it. Some looked down, some smirked, and Aphany just smiled. She didn't cry. She didn't run out. Instead, she stood up, gently tapped her glass, and said, "Let's give the family what they really want, truth." Her voice was calm. Her hands were steady. She reached into her purse and placed a small sealed envelope on the table. The room went quiet. Remla's smile faded. Omeric looked confused. The envelope had one thing inside, a report, the truth. In that moment, Aphany didn't need to shout. She didn't need to prove anything. She had already lost too much, but not her dignity. That night, she didn't just break the silence. She broke the lie that had kept her caged. And everyone in that room finally saw who the real outsider was. Remla always made Aphany feel like she didn't belong. With every word, every glance, she reminded her that without a child, she was nothing. "When a woman fails, the whole bloodline weakens," she would say loudly, especially when guests were around. Aphany would just smile politely, even though her heart was breaking inside. She had tried everything to become a mother. Tests, treatments, prayers, but nothing worked. Still, she kept quiet, hoping one day her love would be enough. But what bothered Aphany more was Remla's strange obsession with bloodlines. She spoke of legacy all the time, about how their family name had to continue through true blood. She hated the idea of adoption, always saying adopted children don't carry the family spirit. It made Aphany wonder, why was she so afraid of adoption? Why did she speak with such anger, such fear? One rainy afternoon, while cleaning out the old storage room, Aphany found a small wooden box filled with papers. Most were useless receipts and old photographs. But buried at the bottom were yellowed letters with the name of a fertility clinic printed at the top. They were dated almost 30 years ago. Her fingers trembled as she read them. The letters spoke about a child, a woman who couldn't carry, a quiet arrangement. There was no name signed at the bottom, but the sender's address matched the clinic Remla used to work at long ago. Something clicked. Aphany's eyes widened as she read more. Could it be? Could the son Remla called her blood, the same one she claimed she gave birth to in pain and pride, not actually be her biological son? That night, Aphany watched Omeric closely. His features, his behavior, his silence. None of it matched Remla's bold personality. Aphany had always been told, he looks just like his father. But now she saw something different. Or maybe something missing. Maybe he wasn't supposed to look like his father, because maybe he wasn't. The thought haunted her. All these years, she had blamed herself, felt broken, felt like an outsider in her own marriage. But what if the real outsider had been hidden in plain sight? What if the child Remla expected Aphany to produce was never even her own to begin with? The truth sat heavy in her chest. She didn't know what to do with it yet, but one thing was clear. She wasn't the only one with secrets. And maybe, just maybe, the one who judged her the most. Aphany had been called many things behind her back. Barren, cursed, empty. Every family gathering turned into a quiet storm of judgment. Her mother-in-law, Remla, always made sure of it. She would say things like, "Some women are just meant to serve tea, not raise children." The words hurt, but what hurt more was the laughter that followed. the way others looked at her like she didn't deserve to wear the title of wife. One morning, after crying in silence yet again, Effany made a decision. She sent out invitations, a baby shower, pink and blue balloons, cupcakes, games, laughter. Everyone was invited. The entire family, the neighbors, the aunts who whispered too much, and yes, Remla. People were shocked. Some came out of curiosity, others in quiet disbelief. Still, the living room was full. There were gifts, decorations, and even a cake that read, "A little miracle on the way." Effany smiled through it all, pretending, playing her part. Her dress flowed beautifully, her hair was styled, but deep inside, her heart was calm, not because there was a baby on the way, but because she knew something no one else did. Remla arrived late, as usual, wearing her biggest smile and bringing a loud energy with her. She hugged Effany like they were best friends, then leaned into one of the guests and whispered, "There is no baby. She just wants attention. This is all for show." Her words spread quickly through the room like smoke. People started glancing around, their smiles faltering. Some even exchanged side eyes. The fake joy was starting to crack, and she was right. There was no baby. But there was a secret, one that Effany had carried quietly, carefully, and painfully for months. It wasn't a child growing inside her. It was the truth growing inside her mind. The truth about the family, about Remla, about who really belonged. When the room was full and the laughter began to fade, Effany stood up. She thanked everyone for coming, her voice steady and soft. "I have a special gift for someone today," she said, turning toward Remla. She handed her a small, beautifully wrapped box. Remla looked confused, but took it with fake excitement. She opened it slowly, expecting maybe a grandma-to-be mug or something to show off. What she found instead was a sealed envelope. She pulled it out, read the front. DNA results, for private use only. The room went silent. Effany didn't say another word. She didn't need to, because some truths don't need announcement. They only need the right moment to be unwrapped. And in that moment, the baby shower didn't end with applause or laughter. It ended with silence. And Remla's smile? It disappeared. Remla always spoke like her family was better than everyone else's. She said their bloodline came from royalty, not ordinary people. "Our sons are born from greatness," she often bragged. "We don't mix with weak roots." These words were usually said with a proud smile, but there was always a sharp edge to them, especially when they were aimed at Effany. Every time Effany failed to get pregnant, Remla made it clear she wasn't good enough for their noble family. Effany kept quiet for a long time, swallowing the insults, hiding her pain, and trying to keep peace in the home. But inside, her heart grew heavier each day. She had tried everything to become a mother, but nothing worked. And Remla's words made it worse, as if Effany alone was the reason for the empty crib in their home. One afternoon, while searching for an old family document, Effany came across a box of photo albums tucked deep in the storage room. The photos were old, faded, but neatly placed. She flipped through them slowly, smiling at some faces and wondering about others. Then, in the middle of one album, she stopped. There was a photo of a woman holding a baby. The woman looked nothing like Remla. Her name was written under the photo but scratched out. The baby's birth date didn't match anything she'd heard before. Effany's heart started racing. Something felt off. She looked through more pages and found more signs, papers, small notes, hospital tags. None of it matched Remla's story of giving birth in her village surrounded by family. The truth hit hard. Omeric had been adopted. Remla had hidden it from everyone, maybe even from her own son. The puzzle pieces started falling into place. The reason behind Remla's obsession with bloodline, her hatred for adoption, her constant attacks on Effany's worth. She had built her pride on a lie and protected it with cruelty. A few days later, during breakfast, Remla brought up the same old topic. "When will you give us a child, Effany? You've been here for years. This house needs a real heir." But this time, Effany didn't stay quiet. She looked Remla straight in the eyes and said calmly, "Ask the woman who gave you yours first." The room froze. Omeric looked up, confused. Remla's smile disappeared. For the first time, the power she held over Effany cracked. Because the truth is, when the roots of a tree are rotten, the fruit can never grow right. And the lie she used to shame Effany had finally come back to her, quietly, powerfully, and with no way to deny it. Omeric always tried to protect his mother, Whenever Afani complained about how Remla treated her, he would say, "Mama loves hard. She just doesn't show it well." He believed his mother was just old-fashioned, a little strict, but deep down, loving. But for Afani, it didn't feel like love. It felt like being judged every single day. Remla would serve others with a smile, but for her, there were only cold eyes and cruel words. "A woman without a child is not a real wife," Remla said more than once, especially when family was around. Omaric stayed quiet then. He never spoke up for Efani, but later he would hug her and say, "Mama will come around." Efani waited and waited, but nothing changed. Her home started to feel like a test. She was always failing. No matter what she did, she was not enough. Then one night, while scrolling on her phone, she saw an ad for a couple's ancestry DNA kit. An idea sparked in her mind. She turned to Omaric and said with a playful smile, "Let's do it for fun. It'll be cute to see where our families come from." He agreed. No questions asked. He ordered the kits. They both gave their samples and sent them off. For the next few weeks, life went on. Remla kept her distance, dropping hints about grandbabies and family honor. Omaric kept saying everything would be okay, and Afani kept wondering what the results might bring. Then the email came. The results were ready. They sat together on the couch, excited at first. They opened Omaric's results, and then hers. Then something strange showed up. The platform showed DNA matches, close family members, cousins, distant relatives. But something was missing. Omaric's mother wasn't on the list, not even as a distant match. Efani double-checked, confused. No shared chromosomes, no biological connection. Omaric stared at the screen. "There must be a mistake," he whispered. But the numbers were clear. The science didn't lie. Slowly, he turned to look at his mother, who had just entered the room. "Mama," he said softly, holding out the laptop. Remla's eyes landed on the screen. She froze. She didn't say a word, didn't ask what it meant, didn't deny it. She just stood there, caught in a silence she couldn't talk her way out of. Omaric's hands dropped to his lap. He looked broken. Everything he believed about his life, his mother, his blood, had just been ripped away. And Afani, she didn't say, "I told you so." She didn't cry. She just sat there, quiet, finally seen. Because love doesn't hide lies. It doesn't bruise hearts or build homes on secrets. And sometimes the truth doesn't shout. It simply arrives and changes everything. The night was cold, but Efani's heart was burning with pain. Another family gathering had just ended, and like always, she left feeling humiliated. This time, it was worse. In front of everyone, Remla raised a glass and proudly said, "To Omaric, for keeping the bloodline clean." Not everyone is strong enough to protect a family's name. Her eyes had locked with Efani's while she said it, like a knife quietly cutting her dignity in front of others. Some people clapped, some looked away, but no one spoke up. Efani sat through the rest of the evening in silence, her smile fake, her hands clenched under the table. As soon as the guests left, she walked upstairs and packed a small bag, a few clothes, some money, her documents. She wasn't even sure where she was going. She just knew she had to go. She couldn't keep living in a house where love felt like a punishment and respect had to be earned with a child. As she walked toward the gate, her steps were fast, her face wet with silent tears. She had almost reached the road when she heard someone call her name. "Efani," the voice whispered. She turned around. It was Remla, the woman who had made her feel worthless, the woman who had shamed her in front of family, the woman who always talked about blood like it was more important than love. "Please wait," Remla said again, this time softer. Her hands were shaking. Efani didn't speak. She just stared at her. "I need to tell you something. About my son. About his real mother," Remla said slowly. Efani's eyes widened. Remla looked down, her strong shoulders now hunched. She began to speak, quietly, carefully. She told Efani the truth she had kept hidden for years. Omaric was not her biological son. He was adopted at birth, a private arrangement, made to hide someone else's shame. Remla had raised him like her own, but somewhere along the way, she started believing the lie. She acted like giving birth made her more of a mother, and she used that lie to control others, especially Efani. When Remla finished, her face was wet with tears, but they weren't tears of control or anger. They were the kind of tears that come when a person finally breaks their own walls. She had spent years wearing a mask of pride, power, and false truth, but now that mask had fallen, Ifani stood in silence, her heart torn between anger and shock. That night didn't end with shouting. It didn't end with forgiveness either. But something had changed. Remla had finally told the truth, and for the first time, she wasn't the powerful one in control. She was just a woman, standing in the dark, finally stripped of her lies. Omarik used to be the kind of man who held Ifani's hand and told her everything would be okay. But slowly, over the years, that version of him faded. Remla's voice got louder in his ears, and her poison spread into their marriage. She kept reminding him that a wife without a child was incomplete, and Omarik started believing it. He started saying less kind things, sitting in silence when his mother insulted Ifani, and eventually he joined in. One night, after another fight over nothing, Omarik stood at the door, looked at Ifani, and whispered, "Maybe God knew not to give you a child." The words broke her. They felt heavier than anything Remla had ever said. From the man who once promised to protect her, now came the sharpest wound. Ifani didn't cry that night. She didn't scream. She simply walked into the bedroom, shut the door, and picked up her phone. That night, she made 3 calls. First, she called a lab. Then she called her lawyer. And lastly, she called her mother and told her everything. 2 weeks passed. Life inside the house stayed cold and quiet. Remla still acted like the queen of the family. Omarik acted like nothing had happened. But Ifani was waiting, patient, focused. Then came the family dinner. Remla cooked and served like always. She made loud jokes about baby names and who the child would look like. Omarik laughed along, completely unaware. Ifani said nothing during the meal. She smiled politely, nodded when spoken to, and waited for the right moment. When everyone was done eating, she reached into her bag and pulled out a folder. She stood up, walked over to Remla, and placed it gently in front of her. "This isn't a pregnancy test," she said calmly. "It's not legal paperwork either." Remla looked confused. She opened the folder slowly. Inside was a paternity test, a DNA report that showed one clear truth. Remla was not Omarik's biological mother. The room went silent. Omarik stared at the paper, reading it over and over. "What is this?" he asked, his voice shaking. But Remla said nothing. Her face turned pale. Her lips trembled. The truth was written in black and white. Something she had hidden for years had now been uncovered, not by force, but by quiet truth. Ifani looked at both of them and said, "Before you call someone wombless, make sure your own story is whole." She turned and walked away, because some lies live in silence for too long, but once the truth is spoken, it cannot be unheard. And that night, the woman they tried to break became the one who revealed what was broken all along. Remla always walked around like she owned everything, especially her son, Omarik. She often told people, "I birthed him in pain. That's why I own his heart." She repeated that line so many times that it felt like a crown she wore proudly. She used those words to remind Ifani that she was the one who gave life, and Ifani was just a woman who couldn't do the same. At family events, she would hold Omarik's hand, smile at people, and say, "Blood is everything." Ifani kept quiet, but inside she began to question things. One night, tired of the constant pressure and hidden pain, Ifani decided to search for answers. She didn't tell anyone. She simply started digging. She called a few hospitals quietly, pretending to confirm old records for a family tree. She asked about births during the year Omarik was born. One by one, hospitals responded. No record of Remla being admitted. No delivery. No birth certificate with her name. It didn't make sense at first, but the deeper she searched, the clearer it became. Then she found it. A small clinic, long closed, had kept digital backups of old files. Omarik's name appeared there, but not under Remla's. The file said, "Infant male, left anonymously, adopted privately." The pieces fell into place. The woman who shouted so loudly about blood, who mocked Ifani's womb, had never carried a child herself. Omarik was adopted, and no one knew. Or maybe someone powerful had hidden it to protect a name, a family, a secret. Ifani sat with the truth quietly for a while. She didn't rush to use it as revenge. Instead, she reflected. All this time, she had been called barren, cursed, empty, but maybe she wasn't. Maybe her body was just waiting for the right moment. Maybe she was protecting something more sacred, her child's future. She wasn't barren. She was careful. Careful not to raise a child in a house full of lies. careful not to pass down shame, control, and secrets. She understood now that motherhood wasn't just about giving birth. It was about honesty, love, and protection. So the next time Remla tried to speak loudly about legacy and pride, Ifani just smiled gently. She didn't need to argue anymore. Remla's legacy was built on a lie, but Ifani's, it would be built on truth, on love that didn't need to be proven, and on a foundation strong enough to never be shaken by secrets. On her birthday, Ifani was hoping for a little peace, maybe a kind word, maybe a simple gift, but instead, Remla handed her a small box with a fake smile and said, "Here, let's just make sure your blood is clean enough to join ours." It was a DNA test kit, the kind people use to trace their ancestry. Ifani's hands froze for a second, but she smiled back, hiding the storm inside her. She had been quiet for too long. She had watched Remla mock her, question her worth, and constantly remind her that she hadn't given the family a child. Every word stung, every silence even more painful. But this gift, this was the final push Ifani didn't even know she needed. Later that night, when everyone had gone to sleep, Ifani stood in front of the bathroom mirror, holding the test kit. But instead of using her own saliva, she gently collected Omarik's from a used straw he had left in the kitchen earlier. She packed it, sealed it carefully, and sent it to the lab under her own name. No one needed to know what she was really testing. 3 weeks later, the results came in. She didn't say anything at first. She waited for the perfect moment, a family dinner. Everyone was there. Remla sat at the head of the table, proudly serving dishes like a queen. Omarik was laughing with his cousin. It was a normal evening, until Ifani stood up and handed Remla a file. "What's this?" Remla asked, raising an eyebrow. "Your birthday gift to me," Ifani replied calmly. Remla opened the folder, expecting to see Ifani's genetic background, but the bold letters on the report said something else. Under biological mother, the name Remla Ose was missing. Instead, another name sat there, a woman who had been sitting quietly in the kitchen corner, wiping her hands with a towel. She had worked in the house for years, a helper, a silent shadow. Her eyes met Ifani's just for a second, and in that moment, Ifani saw the truth she had always felt but never understood. Remla's face went pale. Her hands shook. She didn't speak. Ifani didn't gloat. She didn't raise her voice. She simply looked at Omarik and said, "I think you deserve to know who really brought you into this world." The room fell silent. That night, the real mother was no longer invisible, and Remla, for the first time, she couldn't twist words or hide behind control. She had handed Ifani the key to everything and never realized it. The truth didn't just come out, it stood tall. And for once, Ifani walked away with her head high, not because she proved something, but because she uncovered something that could never be buried again. Ifani had spent years swallowing pain with a forced smile. Every family dinner, every visit to the house came with side comments wrapped as concern, prayers that sounded more like judgment, herbs that were pushed on her like punishment, and whispers behind her back about how she hadn't fulfilled her duty as a woman. Remla led it all, acting like the spiritual leader of the family, always laying hands on Ifani's stomach like it was broken, cursed, or worse, useless. Ifani never fought back. She just nodded, politely. She cried in silence. She lit candles at night and begged God for strength. Not always for a child, but just to be seen for more than her womb. But the breaking point didn't come from Remla. It came from someone smaller, innocent. Her 7-year-old niece pulled her aside one evening and whispered, "Grandma said your stomach is cursed. That's why God won't give you a baby." Ifani's heart shattered, not because it was cruel, but because it was being passed on. This poison of shame, it had crawled into the next generation. That night, she didn't scream. She didn't argue. She just went home quietly, sat on her bed, and ordered a DNA test, but not the kind anyone expected. This test wasn't to prove whether she could have children. It wasn't to prove her body worked or that she was worthy. It was to prove something else, something about them. She mailed it in, waited 2 weeks, and when the envelope came back, she didn't open it right away. She held it like it carried truth heavier than words. Then came Sunday dinner. Everyone was there. The usual crowd, the usual energy. Remla was praying loudly again, speaking in tongues, thanking God for her pure bloodline and for removing barrenness from the family. Ifani said nothing. She stood up, pulled the envelope from her bag, and placed it right in the center of the table. She didn't explain. She didn't point fingers. She didn't even open it. And then she walked out. Silence followed her like a wave. She didn't stay to watch them read it. She didn't need to, because the test said it all, about the lies, the secrets, the fake righteousness. It was never her who needed to be proven clean. It was them who had been hiding behind fake blessings and family pride. That night, she didn't just walk away from a dinner. She walked into her freedom, and for the first time, her silence didn't come from fear. It came from power. If this story hit your heart, don't scroll past. Tag someone who needs to hear this. Share it with a friend who's been shamed, blamed, or silenced. Let them know the truth doesn't destroy, it sets you free. Drop a heart if you believe in standing up quietly but powerfully.